The metallic clang of metals hitting concrete echoed through the stunned silence of Main Street as Officer Patricia Hawkins stood over the scattered ribbons and stars, her face twisted with righteous indignation. The elderly black man in the crisp dress blues remained perfectly still, his weathered hands at his sides, watching the woman who had just ripped the decorations from his chest with a calm that seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting would have. "Stolen valor is a federal crime, old man," she spat, her voice carrying over the crowd of Memorial Day parade watchers who had fallen into an uncomfortable hush. "You think you can just walk around in a costume and fool people? Not on my watch." 20 minutes earlier, General William Carter had been adjusting his service ribbons in the mirror of the community center restroom, preparing for his role as Grand Marshal of Millbrook's annual Memorial Day Parade. At 72, his spine remained straight as a rifle barrel. His gray hair buzzed in the same high and tight he'd worn for 45 years of service. The Distinguished Service Cross caught the fluorescent light as he smoothed his jacket, its blue ribbon a splash of color against the forest of bronze and silver that decorated his chest. The retirement had been difficult. 3 years of civilian life had felt like 3 decades to a man who'd commanded divisions, advised presidents, and spent more time in combat zones than suburban neighborhoods. But today, leading this parade through the tree-lined streets of his new hometown, felt like a small return to purpose. The local VFW had asked him to serve as Grand Marshal after learning of his residence in the Millbrook Arms senior community, though he'd been deliberately vague about the specifics of his service record. He'd stepped out of the community center to find the parade marshaling area in controlled chaos. High school marching bands tuned instruments, while scouts adjusted flags, and local politicians waved at early gathering crowds. The morning sun painted everything in golden hues, and the smell of barbecue from nearby food trucks mixed with the fresh-cut grass scent from the park. It should have been perfect. Patricia Hawkins had been patrolling the area with the self-important stride of someone whose authority had never been questioned in her small domain. As the Homeowners Association's security coordinator, she'd appointed herself guardian of community standards, and those standards were rigidly defined by her narrow worldview. When she spotted the elderly black man in military dress, something dark and familiar stirred in her chest. "Excuse me," she'd called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise. General Carter turned, expecting perhaps a question about parade logistics or a request for a photo. Instead, he found himself facing a middle-aged white woman whose expression radiated hostility. "Sir, I need to see your identification and proof of service." The general's eyebrows raised slightly. In 4 decades of military service, spanning 3 wars and countless diplomatic missions, he'd faced down enemy commanders and hostile foreign officials with less venom than this civilian woman displayed. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Is there a problem?" "The problem," Hawkins said, stepping closer with aggressive confidence, "is that you're wearing military decorations that don't belong to you. I know stolen valor when I see it, and I see it all over your chest." A small crowd began to gather. Sensing conflict in the air, parents pulled children closer while teenagers raised phones, instinctively documenting whatever drama was about to unfold. General Carter maintained his composure, though those who knew him well might have recognized the subtle tightening around his eyes that had once warned subordinates to tread carefully. "Ma'am, I can assure you that every decoration I wear was earned through service to this country," he said quietly. "Perhaps we should speak with the parade organizers if there's been some confusion." "Don't you dare try to intimidate me with that fake military bearing," Hawkins snapped, her voice rising to a pitch that carried clearly to the growing audience. "I've seen guys like you before, playing dress-up to get free meals and parking spots. It's disgusting." The accusation hit harder than enemy fire ever had. General Carter had seen real stolen valor cases during his time at the Pentagon, had personally testified in courts-martial where soldiers had falsified records or worn unearned decorations. To be accused of such dishonor, especially on Memorial Day, in front of civilians who had gathered to honor genuine veterans, felt like a physical blow. "Ma'am, I understand your concern for military integrity," he began, his voice maintaining its steady cadence despite the insult. "But I must respectfully disagree with your assessment." "Respectfully?" Hawkins laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You want to talk about respect? How about respect for the real soldiers who died earning those medals you're wearing as costume jewelry?" Someone in the crowd gasped. A young veteran wearing a Vietnam Veterans Association cap stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "Lady, you need to calm down. You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough," Hawkins shot back, whirling to face the new challenger. "I know that real soldiers don't look like him, and they certainly don't show up to parades looking like they raided a military surplus store." The racist undertone in her words crystallized the tension that had been building. Phones began recording in earnest now, capturing every word as the confrontation escalated beyond a simple misunderstanding into something uglier and more familiar. General Carter felt the weight of decades, not just his own service, but the service of every black soldier who had fought for a country that didn't always fight for them in return. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping to the tone he'd once used to address hostile foreign ministers. "I'm going to ask you one more time to step back and allow the parade organizers to resolve this matter." "Or what?" Hawkins demanded, emboldened by what she perceived as his passive response. "You'll call your fake army buddies, file a complaint with your pretend commander." That's when she made the mistake that would define the rest of her life. With a swift, vicious motion, she reached out and grabbed the Distinguished Service Cross from his chest, yanking hard enough to tear the ribbon and send the medal flying. The Bronze Star followed. Then, the Purple Heart, each decoration hitting the asphalt with metallic finality. "There," she panted, standing over the scattered honors like a conqueror. "Now you look more honest." The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Several people shouted in protest, while others moved to help gather the fallen medals. But General Carter stood motionless, staring down at his decorations scattered on the street like fallen leaves. Among them, the Medal of Honor's distinctive blue ribbon caught the sunlight, its gold star gleaming against the dark asphalt. Patricia Hawkins had just assaulted a recipient of the nation's highest military decoration, a man who had saved 17 soldiers during an ambush in Afghanistan 35 years earlier. She had humiliated a general who had advised 3 presidents on matters of national security, who had commanded operations that remained classified decades later. But she didn't know any of that yet. "You should be ashamed of yourself," called out an elderly woman from the sidewalk. "That man has done more for this country than you ever will." "How would you know?" Hawkins snapped back, her confidence unshaken despite the clearly hostile crowd. "You people always stick together. Don't you always ready to defend the fraud rather than admit the truth?" The racist implication hung in the air like smoke. Several people began shouting at once, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. But General Carter simply bent down and began collecting his medals, his movements careful and deliberate. Each decoration represented not just his own service, but the trust of the soldiers who had served under him, the civilians he had protected, the allies he had defended. "Sir, please don't touch those," said a young Marine who had pushed through the crowd, still wearing his dress blues from an earlier ceremony. "Ma'am, you need to apologize right now. You have no idea what you've just done." "I know exactly what I've done," Hawkins replied, puffing up with self-righteous pride. "I've exposed a fraud and protected the honor of real veterans. Unlike the rest of you, I'm not afraid to stand up for what's right." The young Marine's face darkened. "Lady, that man is wearing a Medal of Honor. Do you understand what that means?" "It means he's a really good fake." Hawkins laughed, the sound grating against the morning air. "Anyone can buy that stuff online these days. The fact that you can't tell the difference is exactly the problem." General Carter had retrieved most of his decorations when the black SUV pulled up to the curb with the subtle authority of official government transport. 3 men in dark suits emerged, their movements precise and professional. The crowd parted instinctively, sensing the arrival of federal authority even before any identification was shown. The man who stepped forward was tall and lean, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Defense Secretary James Morrison had served in the Reagan administration as a young aide, had built a career in both public service and private defense contracting, and had recently been confirmed for his current position. He had also served under General Carter in Afghanistan 20 years earlier, back when Morrison was a lieutenant colonel and Carter was reshaping military doctrine in real time. "General Carter," Secretary Morrison said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent crowd. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I was in the area for the Pentagon Memorial dedication and thought I'd pay my respects." Patricia Hawkins felt the first stirring of doubt as she watched the official-looking men treat the elderly black man with obvious deference. But pride and prejudice are powerful forces, and she had committed too much to back down now. "Excuse me," she interrupted, stepping between Morrison and Carter with the aggressive confidence that had carried her through the entire confrontation. "I don't know who you people think you are, but this man is impersonating a veteran. I've already exposed his stolen valor, and I suggest you step away before you become accessories to his fraud." Secretary Morrison turned to face her with the slow deliberation of a man whose patience had very definite limits. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" "Patricia Hawkins, Security Coordinator for the Millbrook Arms Homeowners Association," she announced, as if the title carried federal authority. "And I'm telling you that this man is wearing decorations he never earned, including what appears to be a fake Medal of Honor." The silence that followed was so complete that the distant sound of the high school band warming up seemed to echo off the surrounding buildings. Secretary Morrison looked down at the scattered medals in General Carter's hands, then back at the woman who had just accused one of America's most decorated living soldiers of stolen valor. "Ma'am," Morrison said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "I am James Morrison, Secretary of Defense of the United States. The man you've just assaulted is General William Carter, recipient of the Medal of Honor, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart with 3 oak leaf clusters, and approximately 30 other decorations earned over 45 years of distinguished service to this nation." Hawkins opened her mouth to respond, but no sound emerged. Around them, phones continued recording as the implications of Morrison's words sank in. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God," while another voice muttered, "She is so screwed." "Furthermore," Morrison continued, his voice rising to address the entire crowd, "General Carter commanded the Joint Task Force that eliminated 3 major terrorist cells in Afghanistan, served as military advisor to Presidents Bush, Clinton, and Obama, and personally saved the lives of 17 American soldiers during the Battle of Konar Province in 1988, for which he received our nation's highest military honor." Patricia Hawkins staggered backward, as if physically struck. The color drained from her face as she looked around at the crowd, searching for support that was no longer there. Even her most ardent defenders had fallen silent, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. That's impossible," she stammered, her voice barely audible. He can't be. I mean, he doesn't look like. Like what? Morrison's voice cut through her, stammering like a blade. He doesn't look like what? Ms. Hawkins, please. Enlighten us about what you think a Medal of Honor recipient should look like. The question hung in the air, exposing the racist assumptions that had driven the entire confrontation. Hawkins looked around desperately, but found only condemning stares and recording phones. The young Marine who had tried to defend Carter earlier stepped forward, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "Ma'am, I served in General Carter's command in Iraq," he said, his voice steady but intense. "He's the reason I came home alive. He's the reason a lot of us came home alive. And you just threw his medals in the street like garbage." General Carter finally spoke, his voice carrying the same calm authority it had maintained throughout the confrontation. "Secretary Morrison, while I appreciate your defense, perhaps we should focus on the parade. These people came to honor fallen veterans, not to witness this unfortunate misunderstanding." Misunderstanding. Morrison's eyebrows rose. "General, with all due respect, this woman assaulted you, destroyed your property, and subjected you to racial slurs in front of hundreds of witnesses. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a federal crime." The crowd murmured as phones continued capturing every word. Local news crews, alerted by social media posts, were already arriving with cameras and microphones. What had started as a simple Memorial Day parade was becoming a national incident in real time. Patricia Hawkins finally found her voice, though it came out as a desperate squeak. "I didn't know. Nobody told me. How was I supposed to know?" "You were supposed to know," said an elderly veteran wearing a Vietnam service cap. "Because you should have asked questions before you attacked a man. You should have shown respect before you showed your prejudice." "That's enough," Morrison announced, his voice cutting through the growing commotion. "This parade is postponed until we can restore proper dignity to these proceedings." He turned to address the crowd directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, Memorial Day is about honoring those who gave their lives in service to our nation. It's also about respecting those who served and survived, regardless of their appearance or background." Two FBI agents had materialized from the government vehicles, their presence lending official weight to the proceedings. One approached Hawkins with the polite inevitability of federal law enforcement. "Ma'am, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. You need to come with us for questioning regarding possible violation of federal statutes concerning assault on military personnel and interference with official proceedings." "This is insane," Hawkins protested, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "I was just doing my job. I was protecting military honor." "No," General Carter said quietly, stepping forward with his medals now securely returned to his chest. "You were protecting your own prejudices. There's a difference." As the FBI agents led Hawkins away, the crowd began to disperse, but many lingered to approach General Carter. Veterans stepped forward to shake his hand. Children asked for photos, and more than one person apologized for Hawkins' behavior. The general received each interaction with the same patient dignity he had shown throughout the confrontation. Secretary Morrison pulled Carter aside as the immediate chaos settled. "Bill, I need to ask you formally, do you want to press federal charges? Assault on a Medal of Honor recipient carries serious penalties." General Carter considered the question with the same careful deliberation he had once applied to military strategy. "Jim, I've spent 45 years serving a country where people like Patricia Hawkins exist, alongside people like that young Marine who defended me. Putting her in prison won't change what she thinks about people who look like me." "But it might prevent her from acting on those thoughts again," Morrison replied. "And it might send a message to others like her." Then yes, Carter said finally. Press charges. Not for me, but for the next veteran who might not have a defense secretary to defend them. The local police chief, who had been conferring with the FBI agents, approached with obvious nervousness. General Carter, Secretary Morrison, I want to apologize personally for this incident. Ms. Hawkins has no official authority beyond her homeowners association, and her actions today do not represent the values of our community. Chief Williams, Morrison said, reading the man's nameplate. What steps is the city taking to ensure this doesn't happen again? Well, sir, we're immediately reviewing all our Memorial Day security protocols, and we're launching a veterans outreach program to educate the community about military service and recognition. General Carter nodded approvingly. That sounds constructive. Chief, perhaps you could also consider sensitivity training for community leaders and security personnel. Understanding and respect are learned behaviors. The impromptu press conference that followed drew national attention. Video of Hawkins attacking General Carter had already gone viral, but Morrison's official response elevated the story to front-page news, standing before the gathered cameras, with General Carter beside him in his restored dress blues. The defense secretary delivered a statement that would be quoted for years to come. Today, we witnessed both the worst and best of America, Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly over the assembled crowd. We saw prejudice and ignorance attack honor and service, but we also saw a community rally to defend what's right, and we saw a true American hero respond to hatred with dignity. He gestured to General Carter. This man embodies the values our military fights to protect: courage, integrity, selfless service, and personal courage. He has earned every decoration on his chest through actions that most of us can barely imagine. To attack him is to attack the very ideals that make this country worth defending. A reporter raised her hand. Secretary Morrison, what consequences will Ms. Hawkins face? That will be determined by the appropriate authorities. Morrison replied, but I can tell you that assaulting a Medal of Honor recipient is a federal crime that carries serious penalties. The FBI is conducting a full investigation. Another reporter called out, General Carter, how do you feel about what happened today? General Carter stepped forward, his bearing still perfectly military despite his age. I feel sadness that in 2023, we still have Americans who judge military service by the color of a soldier's skin rather than the content of their character. But I also feel hope, because for every Patricia Hawkins, there are dozens of Americans who know better and do better. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, with both men fielding inquiries about military diversity, veteran recognition, and the broader implications of the incident. Throughout it all, General Carter maintained the composed professionalism that had marked his entire career, while Morrison provided the institutional weight of official response. As the press conference concluded, the mayor of Millbrook approached with obvious anxiety. General Carter, Secretary Morrison, on behalf of our entire city, I want to apologize for today's events. We're mortified that this happened in our community. Mayor Thompson, Carter replied, one person's actions don't define a community. How you respond to those actions does. We want to make this right, the mayor said earnestly. We're prepared to offer a formal apology, rename the street where this happened in your honor, and establish a scholarship fund for military families. Carter held up a hand gently. I appreciate the gesture, but I don't need streets named after me. What I need is assurance that the next veteran who walks through your community will be treated with the respect they've earned, regardless of what they look like. The rescheduled parade, held the following weekend, drew 3 times the usual crowd. General Carter rode in the lead car, his decorations gleaming in the afternoon sun, waving to thousands of people who had come not just to see a parade, but to witness redemption. Veterans from across the region traveled to Millbrook to march behind him, creating an impromptu demonstration of military unity that stretched for 6 blocks. Patricia Hawkins, meanwhile, faced a very different reality. Federal charges of assault on military personnel carried a maximum sentence of 5 years, while civil rights violations could add additional time. Her homeowners association had immediately terminated her position and issued a public apology, while her employer, a local insurance company, had placed her on indefinite suspension pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. But perhaps more significantly, she faced the social consequences of her actions. The video of her attacking General Carter had been viewed millions of times, making her face recognizable to strangers across the country. Restaurant servers refused to serve her, stores asked her to leave, and former friends crossed the street to avoid her. She had become a symbol of everything wrong with American prejudice, and the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. 6 months later, Patricia Hawkins stood in federal court as Judge Margaret Chen delivered her sentence. She had pleaded guilty to assault and civil rights violations in exchange for a reduced sentence. But even that mercy came with serious consequences. "Ms. Hawkins," Judge Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority, "your actions on Memorial Day represent a profound failure of American values. You attacked a man who has given his life to serving this country, and you did so based solely on racial prejudice. The court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service with veterans organizations." General Carter, who had attended the sentencing as requested by the prosecution, showed no satisfaction as Hawkins was led away in handcuffs. Justice had been served, but justice couldn't undo the damage to military respect or racial harmony that her actions had caused. It could only ensure that consequences followed actions, and that others might think twice before following her example. The Veterans Outreach Program that emerged from the incident became a national model. The Carter Initiative, as it came to be known, provided education about military service, recognition protocols, and the diverse faces of American heroism. Communities across the country adopted similar programs, turning one woman's prejudice into a catalyst for broader understanding. General Carter himself became reluctantly famous. His story, inspiring books, documentaries, and countless speeches about service and sacrifice. But he remained focused on the mission that had defined his entire life, serving others. He established a foundation to support military families facing discrimination, using his newfound platform to advocate for veterans who didn't have defense secretaries to defend them. On the first anniversary of the incident, Millbrook held its largest Memorial Day parade in city history. General Carter again served as Grand Marshal, but this time he was joined by dozens of other decorated veterans from every branch of service and every background. The message was clear: American heroism comes in all colors, all genders, all backgrounds, and all deserves equal respect. As the parade concluded, a young girl approached General Carter with a hand-drawn picture of a soldier. "My daddy says you're a real hero," she said, offering the drawing with shy pride. "He says heroes protect people who can't protect themselves." General Carter knelt down to accept the picture, his weathered hands gentle with the child's artwork. "Your daddy is very wise," he said softly, "and someday, you might be a hero too. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and they're all around us." The child beamed and ran back to her parents, clutching a Medal of Honor recipient's handshake like a treasure. Around them, the crowd was dispersing, families heading home with their flags and programs, children asking questions about the soldiers they had seen. It was exactly what Memorial Day should be: a community coming together to honor service, remember sacrifice, and teach the next generation about the price of freedom. Later that evening, as the sun set over Millbrook's tree-lined streets, General Carter sat on his apartment balcony, reviewing the thank you letters that had arrived throughout the week. Messages from veterans, families, students, and ordinary citizens who had been inspired by his response to hatred. Each letter reinforced the same truth he had learned over 4 decades of service: America was worth fighting for, not because it was perfect, but because it was capable of becoming better. The medal collection sat in its display case nearby, each decoration catching the fading light like small stars. They represented more than personal achievement. They represented the trust of soldiers who had served under his command, the gratitude of civilians he had protected, and the responsibility that came with wearing the uniform. Patricia Hawkins had tried to steal that honor. But honor cannot be stolen. It can only be earned. One decision at a time. One moment of courage at a time. One act of service at a time. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, General Carter reflected on the strange journey that had brought him from that humiliating moment on Main Street to this peaceful evening. He had been tested once again, not by enemy fire, but by domestic prejudice, and he had responded with the same values that had guided him through every challenge of his military career. The real victory wasn't Patricia Hawkins' conviction or his own vindication, but the conversations that had started, the minds that had changed, and the community that had chosen to be better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to serve, new chances to make a difference. At 72, General William Carter understood that a soldier's duty never truly ends. It just evolves, from protecting democracy abroad to defending dignity at home, from commanding troops in combat to inspiring communities in peace. The mission continued, and as long as there were patriots willing to serve and citizens willing to support them, America would continue to be worthy of the sacrifice so many had made in her name. The medals gleamed quietly in their case, waiting for the next opportunity to remind the world that heroism takes many forms. Honor transcends all boundaries, and respect must be earned but never forgotten. General Carter smiled slightly as he turned out the lights, knowing that tomorrow would bring new chances to serve, to teach, and to demonstrate that the best response to hatred is always dignity, courage, and unwavering commitment to the values worth defending.